Welcome back to F1 Brake Check, where we go off topic faster than Ocon pitches it in the kitty litter. On today's edition, we're going to give an overview of the Bahrain Grand Prix circuit. We'll have a new biography for our history lesson. Corey will also scramble my gray matter in our Stump the Pundit round, and we'll have our reactions from this weekend's action and get you ready for the next round. So settle back, the chaos is underway now on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We're back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me as always is my ride or die, my brother in arms, my pundit for life, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. Yeah, it's been a busy few days, but it's been good. Friday we hung out, had our actual in person, had a couple beers and some good burgers and a couple of good smokes.
Yep, it was a good time. I always look forward to those, and always little sad when they end and everything. So, but yeah, I cannot wait for the next one. So. But I guess you're going to have to be doing a little traveling between now and then.
Yeah, the next one. Yeah, so I'll be in Europe here in a couple weeks.
Fun. I'm super jealous. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky, man.
Yep, I would say so. All right, so let's take and jump into our overview of the Bahrain Grand Prix circuit. Rising from the golden sands of Sakhir, like a mirage, the Bahrain International Circuit is more than just a racetrack. It's a monument to ambition, speed, and the audacity to race in the heart of the desert. Opened in 2004, this 5.412-kilometer labyrinth of tarmac was the first Formula One venue in the Middle East, an audacious gamble at the time. Designed by the ubiquitous Herman Tilke, the circuit weaves through the desert landscape like a serpent made of asphalt, fast, technical, and utterly unforgiving. But Bahrain is not just a collection of corners, it's an arena of drama. The track layout features 15 turns that test everything from raw horsepower to delicate tire management. The first corner, aptly dubbed the Michael Schumacher turn, is a heavy braking zone that invites dive bombs and disaster in equal measure. Get it wrong, and your race could be over before it's even begun. Since 2014, the Bahrain Grand Prix has run under the floodlights, turning the desert into a glowing amphitheater of speed. The contrast between fire-lit skies and the artificial white light of the circuit gives the race an almost cinematic quality. The circuit surface is notoriously abrasive, punishing tires and rewarding teams with clever strategy. Sand, while largely kept at bay by a glue-like paint used on the outskirts of the track, remains a wild card. One gust of wind and sand, while largely kept at bay by a glue-like paint used on the outskirts of the track, remains a wild card. One gust of wind and grip becomes an illusion. And then there's the history. In its debut year, Ferrari's Michael Schumacher took the win, starting a legacy of iconic moments. In 2020, the circuit hosted two unforgettable back-to-back races during the COVID-adjusted season. The first was infamous for Romain Grosjean's fiery crash, a miracle escape that stunned the world. Just a week later, on the shortened outer loop layout, Sergio Perez stormed from last to first to claim his maiden victory in one of the most dramatic drives in recent memory. The last couple of years, the Bahrain Grand Prix was the season opener, and it still provides the lone preseason testing weekend for F1 cars. It's where new cars reveal their true nature, rookies meet reality, sandbagging or chasing headlines is the name of the game, and championship hopes are either sparked or shattered. So when the lights go out in Bahrain, it's a battle in the desert where seasons are defined, hearts are broken, and the roar of engines echo across the dunes. This is Sakhir. This is Bahrain, and it never disappoints.
Yeah, Bahrain is definitely one of my favorites. It's so technical, and like you said, there's so many places where you can mess up, and your track time or your lap time is just killed.
Yeah, on the sim, that it is probably, when you look at the track, it does not look that difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, though, is that when you're actually down low and you're at track level, it has some of the most challenging turns I have on of just about any track. The turn one when you're looking at it from an overview's perspective, it looks like more like it's just a slightly more than a 90-degree turn, but it is so heavy into the braking, and in order to be able to take and get the proper entry into one and then get the proper exit out of two without spinning the car going into three, because it's like if you get too far out on the curves coming out of two, you're going to be in the wall, as we saw with Ocon.
Right.
And we saw a couple people spin out in that section. And then also it's, I believe it's turns 9, 10, and 11 is probably one of the most difficult sections of any track I've ever been on, because you go through this little kink, but if you've got the wheel turned just a little too much or something, when you go to hit the hard braking zone going into the turn that goes onto the straightaway, you're going to spin it every freaking time. And it's like, I don't know how many hundreds of times I have spun out on that corner. It's like, just the fact that F1 drivers, F2 drivers, F3 drivers can all go to Bahrain and not spin it out every single lap through that section is it's just a testament of just how amazing these drivers really are.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's get on to our history lesson. In the ruthless high-speed world of Formula One, where reputations are built in milliseconds and lost in an instant, one man's name becomes synonymous with resilience, obsession, and unstoppable drive. That man was Sir Frank Williams. Born on April 16th, 1942, in South Shields, England, Frank Williams didn't grow up with a racing pedigree or silver spoon. He was raised by his mother and later sent to boarding school, where his fascination with speed first took hold. Legend has it that a ride in a friend's Jaguar XK 150 was the spark that ignited a lifelong obsession with motorsport. From that moment on, Frank wasn't just chasing dreams, he was chasing destiny. He began modestly, racing and selling cars, scraping together every penny he could in a world dominated by aristocrats and industrial tycoons. In 1969, against all odds, Frank founded Frank Williams Racing Cars. His early efforts were underfunded and often overlooked. He worked out of a cramped telephone booth-sized office, making deals and begging for parts, determined to make his mark, because Frank Williams wasn't built to quit. In 1977, after years of scraping by, everything changed. Teaming up with the legendary engineer Patrick Head, he created Williams Grand Prix Engineering. Together, they turned a struggling privateer operation into a force of nature. Just 2 years after its founding, the team claimed their first Formula One victory, and in 1980, barely 3 years after forming, Williams Grand Prix seized the Constructors' Championship and the driver's title with Alan Jones behind the wheel. It was a seismic shift. Frank Williams, the underdog outsider, had stormed the castle. In 1990, another pivotal chapter in the Williams story began with the arrival of a brilliant, fiercely creative engineer, one Adrian Newey. Newey, already making waves in the paddock for his radical aerodynamic designs, was recruited as the team's chief designer. His partnership with Patrick Head created one of the most formidable technical lineups in Formula One history. Newey's innovative and aggressive approach to car design transformed Williams into an unstoppable force in the early 1990s. Under his direction, the team produced some of the fastest, most technologically advanced machines the sport has ever seen. The FW14B, in particular, bristling with active suspension, traction control, and aerodynamic wizardry, dominated the 1992 season with Nigel Mansell, setting new benchmarks for the technical excellence. Adrian Newey's genius, combined with Frank Williams' relentless leadership and Patrick Head's technical prowess, made the team an engineering powerhouse and cemented their place at the front of the Formula One grid. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the Williams team became one of the greatest dynasties in Formula One history. Names like Keke Rosberg, Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, Damon Hill, and Jacques Villeneuve would all take Williams cars to the top step of the podium. The team claimed 9 Constructors' Champions and 7 Drivers' titles, a record rivaled only by Ferrari and only matched by McLaren last year. But Frank's story was never without tragedy. In 1986, after a preseason test in France, Frank was involved in a horrific car accident. The crash left him paralyzed from the neck down. For many, it would have marked the end, but not for Frank Williams. Within weeks, he was back at the helm of his team, conducting operations from his wheelchair, his voice the sharp, commanding presence in the garage. Frank Williams was a man who lived and breathed racing. Relationships came second, comfort was irrelevant, and sentimentality had no place in the pit lane. Drivers admired his unwavering focus, even if it meant tough decisions and very cold conversations. In Frank's world, the car and the cause always came first. Sir Frank Williams passed away on November 28th, 2021. He left behind more than a team. He left a legacy of sheer, unyielding will in a sport obsessed with speed. Frank Williams taught us that the greatest strength lies not in the car, but in the man behind the dream.
Yeah, I love Frank's story. It's one of the reasons why I really am hoping for a good season with Williams this year.
Me too.
But, yeah, I mean, just such a class act all the way through.
So I remember, I started watching Formula One. Basically, I don't even think it was, I hadn't even been watching Formula One even a full year when Frank had his accident. And I remember reading the stories about the accident. And there was, a period of time there right after the accident happened where they weren't sure, Frank was even going to live. It was a horrific crash. And if you ever see any of the pictures, if you haven't ever seen them, go look them up on Google and look, Frank Williams crash. And how anyone survived that accident is just beyond me because the car was just a mangled mess. And so, and it was even more amazing when, like I was saying in the history, it was within just a matter of weeks that Frank was back at the helm. He was out of the hospital and, even though he, was, a lot of guys, could have just given up, sold the team and walked away, but Frank said, no, I may be confined to a wheelchair, but this is my team and I am going to continue to do what I do. And it's just his story of perseverance is just there's you hear a lot of stories about perseverance, but there are stories of perseverance and then there's the story of Frank Williams and his is just in another stratosphere.
Right. Completely agree.
Yep. So rest in peace, sir. All right, so we are on to what is undoubtedly my favorite part of the week. As anyone who has been listening to our little podcast for any period of time knows that I am a longtime fan of Formula One, and Corey is a somewhat newer fan. And every week, Corey takes and tries to twist up my gray matter and in our section that we call Stump the Pundit. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
So, a little bit of fun. I know how much of a Nigel Mansell fan you are. So I decided, hey, why not ask Scott some questions about Nige? I'm hoping I can at least stump you once.
Okay.
Let's see how this goes. Why did Nigel Mansell's stint with McLaren in 1995 come to an early end?
Because he didn't fit in the car.
Yeah, he was too typical.
I'm sorry?
He was too big. Exactly.
Yes. So yes, the McLaren that year, the cockpit was designed with a very, very narrow footwell. And because Mansell was a very stocky guy, he literally didn't fit in the car. And it was like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was he missed, believe it was like either the first 2 or 3 races of the season simply because they had to literally, in a rush job, literally rebuild the cockpit in order for him to be able to fit into it.
That's crazy, right?
It is. It's insane.
Okay, next one. Which year did Mansell win his only Formula One World Championship?
That would be 1992.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I thought I was going to get you on one. No, 92 is correct. Which race is remembered for Mansell's pass on Senna down one of the main straights at over 200 miles an hour?
That would have been, I believe that was Silverstone, and that would have been 1991.
91 is correct, but it was actually the Spanish Grand Prix.
Ah, okay.
At which Grand Prix did Mansell dramatically lose the world championship due to a tire failure while leading the race?
That would have been in Australia at yep. So that would have been at Adelaide, and I believe it was 1980. It was either 86 or 87.
86 on the dot.
Okay.
On the dot. Let's try one more, see if I can get you at least on one.
Okay.
Here. So in 1992, Monaco, why couldn't Mansell overtake Senna in the closing laps despite having fresher tires and a faster car?
I mean, other than the fact that it's Monaco and it's nearly impossible to pass.
It's because of Senna, yeah, his defensive driving, but
and Senna, was literally is the king of Monaco, having won 6 times, that he could make that car very, very wide. That there's no,
Awesome, and that's it for Stump the Pundit.
Okay, well then we have talked about. I've got one question for you then. So, what distinction from a championship perspective does Nigel Mansell have? And we've talked about this before.
Other than he got IndyCar in the same year.
Yep, he's the only driver to hold both the Formula One driver's title and the IndyCar driver's title simultaneously.
Yep.
Because he clinched the IndyCar title in 1993, and it was another 2 or 3 weeks before before the Formula One champion was crowned.
Right.
All right, then. So that was our Stump the Pundit section. That was fun. Thank you, Corey. So a good time as always. Okay, so let's take and jump into our news and reaction section here for this week. So first off, we have, as we talked about the Bahrain Grand Prix circuit. So, and for this year's edition of the race, unlike Suzuka, did not disappoint, because unlike Suzuka, this one was action-packed pretty much from the get-go. We had racing, we had passing, we had some absolutely spectacular moves, not just from the veterans, but from the rookies as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, a return of the safety car. So, let's just jump right into it. So first of all, your reactions to this week's race.
It's a mixed bag, I think that, obviously McLaren did really, really well. I think that Norris, he had some issues. I really think that he should have at least second, maybe even first. But man, Piastri just drove like a demon. We'll talk about a couple other ones, but especially Red Bulls and things like that. But I overall, the person that impressed me by far the most is, again, Antonelli. Holy God. This guy is unbelievable.
Yes. I know that we kind of, So, I know that we kind of, we talked about him, leading up to the season, thinking that, maybe he, was not going to be able to handle the bright lights and the pressure of going straight to McLaren.
Yeah.
But I just, this kid, and it's like, it's been reported in a number of places, this kid's not just driving in Formula One, but he's also actually finishing high school, for crying out loud.
I know.
I mean, it's just incredible, the fact that he's able to balance, the studies and everything and trying to finish, high school, and, he's qualifying 5th on the grid for the Bahrain Grand Prix.
Yep.
He's putting it on the 3rd row of the, during qualifying. And it's like, crazy. And he had, probably, I would say was probably the overtake of the race too.
Yeah.
It's like this kid, he's 18 years old and he's got cojones, unlike we've seen in a very, very long time.
Oh, completely agree.
It is
a matchup with him and Max Verstappen at Mercedes. Oh, I couldn't even imagine,
Oh my God. That just,
that would be magical, honestly. Anyway,
and also,
so,
I said
overall,
3rd row. I actually meant he was actually on the 2nd row. So it was, he was lined up next to Charles Leclerc on the 2nd row. So I mean, which makes it even all that much more impressive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because think about everybody else that he beat out. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it was incredible. So we already kind of touched upon it, but what did you think about so McLaren, had another, for by all accounts, dominant weekend in the fact that, both drivers, headed the timesheets, in every single practice. Oscar took an absolutely brilliant pole. Lando, okay, he kind of stumbled and he put it all on himself. He said it wasn't, the team, it was his fault, the
Hmm.
reason why he ended up qualifying sixth. Um, so, but other than that, he was able to make his way up from sixth all the way up to third. And if it weren't for, another couple, little foibles or whatever, yeah, you're right. I mean, he could have very well have, been second place or could have possibly even challenged Oscar for the win, but Oscar was on a tear
Oh yeah.
this weekend. I mean, it
Yep.
was just like you said, he was like a man possessed.
Yeah. No doubt about it. It reminded me very much of when Max was winning every single race. It was just
Hmm.
as soon as the lights went out, you weren't touching him. You know, first corner came and went, and after that, they basically saw the charging lights in his back, and that was it.
So very, very true. Yeah, it was just by all accounts, it was like no, there was other than, like I said, other than Lando's, little stumble in qualifying, even the pit stops, were spot on and everything else.
Hmm.
So McLaren just thoroughly dominated the whole weekend.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
another double podium for him. So,
Right.
but the surprise was, though, is that how good Mercedes looked at this track, in the fact that, George qualified second. He was very, very close to Oscar's time.
Yeah.
At one point, he actually had the pole until Oscar, finished a few seconds, behind him,
Right.
and he only, lost out to Oscar by what was it, like 2/10 of a second,
It
you
was,
know,
yeah. Right.
yeah, I mean, it was razor thin, between him and so the Mercedes, and then like we already talked about, Antonelli, started fourth on the day, and had, he lost a couple places at the beginning, but
Hmm.
and he kind of stumbled during the race and everything and didn't end up, he finished just right outside the points and everything, but this kid just continues to impress me. And, the thing that really amazes me is the turnaround at Mercedes and
Yeah.
how strong that they have looked so far. Not, winning form yet, but I mean, they're definitely
They're
challenging. That's for
there.
damn
Yeah,
sure.
they're getting there. I have to say too that I think George Russell just drove a phenomenal race.
Yes.
I think he was just limited by the car. I don't think that you could have raced that car any better and gotten any closer to McLaren. I think that he drove a perfect race
He really
in that
did.
car. I
Yes.
really hands down to him. I think he did fantastic. Obviously, his teammate did wonderful as well. But I think because he's so young, Antonelli gets all the spotlight. But let's not forget that George he was on fire as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did nothing to take nothing away from,
Absolutely.
George. And it's like I had forgotten that he had actually made his Mercedes debut at this track
Huh.
back during the COVID years,
Yep.
when Lewis Hamilton contracted COVID and he had to
Yeah,
come in
that's right.
and he came, with the except, it just it, at the beginning of the day, you really thought that George was going to take and just walk away to his
Yep.
first win, after
Yeah.
having, gotten promoted from, Williams, where,
Williams. Yep.
everybody referred to him as Mr. Saturday because of his
Yeah.
qualifying efforts and the fact that he continued to qualify that Williams way better than what it should have, so we thought all were quite impressed. It's like he puts it on pole, he's pulling away at the start, and it just ended up not being his day. The racing gods did not smile on him that day,
Yeah.
but it was still, by all accounts, this is a track that he truly, truly loves.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So, with that being said, as we talked about last week, we asked, hey, is Red Bull back? And I think, and we both were like, said that no, we thought that, it was just a a blip on the radar because Suzuka is such a driver's track, and it's a place that Max loves. That was the whole thing. And I think this week we saw them kind of come back to earth. Wouldn't you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah. I wouldn't say come back to Earth. I'd say more like slammed into Earth as a meteor.
Yeah.
It
I
was
would say
not
that
a
that's
good day.
probably not far off.
Yeah, I mean, everything from the car itself just being horrible to their pit stops. Again, we see examples of their pit stops are way, way off times. I mean, I understanding that they had the technical difficulty with the stoplight not changing to green. Okay, stuff like that happens not very often, but it happens. Whatever, but they still had slow stops, and then their strategy is way off as well. Um, they should not have gone onto the hards. Not in that car. In
No.
another car, yes, that setup would have worked. And in fact, we saw several cases of where hards actually did work for them very well. Not in that Red Bull car. They should never have gone to hards on that. That was a huge misstep and cost Verstappen many at least 3 or 4, well, probably 2 or 3 places at least.
Oh yeah, easily. I mean, Verstappen did a really good job to get the
For what
car,
he had, yeah.
to seventh on, in qualifying,
Right.
but like you said, because the hards were definitely the wrong way to go for
Completely.
that car on that day with the way that it was handling and everything. So he was only able to finish one better. He ends up finishing, sixth on the on the day, but with that in mind, though, let's talk Yuki Watch 2025, in the fact that amazingly enough, Yuki actually qualified 10th, but he wasn't very far off of Max's qualifying time. He was really, really close,
Mm-hmm.
but he got it into Q3, and if it hadn't been for apparently he had some kind of technical difficulty that, kept him from, being able to put down, a final lap. I think it probably would have been even closer, had he not been able to, put down a final lap, a lot when all the other front runners were able to do so, but
Yeah.
all in all, a very, very solid, weekend for him, a very, very solid qualifying. And then he takes and he ends up, bringing it home ninth. He brings it home in the points for the second week in a row.
Yeah.
you know, Yuki, even went on record, I forget which publication it was, but he even went on record saying, when you look at, at the cars, our setups are very, very similar. And
Yeah.
which just goes to, makes me just shake my head. And I want to get your thoughts on this is that was the one thing that still just blows me away in the fact that they chose Lawson over Yuki is they could look, Christian Horner has access to everything as and all the technical data as well as everything else that's going on. And how he couldn't take and look at the setup sheets and see, okay, Yuki's setup and Max's setup are very similar. And even though Lawson kind of went a little faster during the postseason test back in, uh, you know,
Yeah.
uh, at Abu Dhabi, again, I'm flabbergasted that just, how much better would Yuki, further ahead would Yuki be had he
Yeah.
been in the car from the very beginning?
I mean, everybody besides Red Bull thought that they should have chosen Yuki Tsunoda over Lawson.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I saw one pundit or one Twitter post or X post that said, "Oh man, Lawson's a better choice." I didn't see one. He was you may have seen it, but for the most part, I haven't seen very many
Yeah,
because
I'd only seen one or two that said
yeah,
yes, simply because Lawson had more. They gave the same argument that Christian Horner gave, that Lawson had more upside to him than
yeah,
what Yuki did.
yeah.
But
But I
go
mean,
ahead and
yeah, you know how he drives. You've seen him driving for the last 4 years. He can handle the pressure, no problems. Just like what we've talked about in the past. So, for it's another huge misstep from upper management at Red Bull, and upper management meaning Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Two big missteps that they've done. And
Yes.
now the car isn't functioning right. So I would say that Christian's time is probably fairly limited. At least the clock has started.
Yeah. And you may very well be right, because the fact that, even in the quote unquote lean years between the time that, Vettel won his last
Yeah.
championship and Verstappen won his first championship, they still had wins in there and everything. But yeah, it's starting to look really, really dicey at Red Bull right now. And it's just, you gotta kind of almost feel for Yuki in the fact that, he may have caught them at a bad time,
Yeah,
but the
I
fact that he
know.
is making an absolute, I mean, he's making hay. He really is, despite the bad circumstances, despite the fact that he's behind, behind the proverbial eight ball. But
Yeah.
what Yuki has done to me is so far this season, in the time that from switching from Racing Bulls to Red Bull, has been nothing short of, fantastic. It's just been great. I've loved to watch it, and
Same here.
I can't wait for the next couple races to
Yeah.
see, how much better on he goes.
And it's funny. He wasn't that far behind Verstappen, which, again, we haven't really seen that many times within the past few years.
Hmm.
So it's really encouraging. And this is only his second race in the seat. So
Yeah.
it's really encouraging to see what he can do in that seat, say in 4 or 5 races.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Again,
Like I
oh
said,
yeah,
no, I was just going to say I cannot wait to when we're having this, because I'm sure that we're going to have this conversation many more times
yeah,
between now and the summer break. But I cannot wait to see what this conversation looks like by the time we do get to the summer break.
yeah,
Fans. So one of the other big surprises this weekend was the kind of what I am referring to as the lap of the gods that came out of Pierre Gasly, who took and put it on the third row, qualified fifth for the
yeah.
Grand Prix on Saturday, which would just, I mean, he put down a lap that is just, unbelievable. And I just cannot get over the pace of the Alpine this weekend. And it makes me kind of wonder if, maybe, we talked last week about who we thought was the tops of the midfield, but I'm starting to think we might have to start putting Alpine in that discussion.
Yeah, if they continue, man. I mean, even Doohan looked pretty good.
Hmm.
He's starting to come up a little bit better than what he's, especially in the first 2 races. Again, he's a rookie, so he's still making some rookie mistakes in a much more powerful car than what he's been in before.
Hmm.
So he looked much better, a little bit more confident. So as his confidence grows, I'm hoping that he really matures in that seat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing was is that, he did, I mean, he was top of the, just he missed out on getting into Doohan missed out on getting into Q3 by 7 thousandths of a second. I mean, it was that
Yeah,
razor close
right.
to him getting into, Q3,
Yeah,
so I mean, both of the cars looked really, really good this weekend. The back end, especially because one of the things that I had noticed in the first couple races is the back end on the Alpine had looked really, really nervous. And this week, from what I could, from what I could see on watching, the footage and everything from, the racing or the in car and things like that, is the back end looked way more stable.
yeah.
And I think that they might have found something magical, that take and help keep the car, planted a little better, especially in the medium and high speed corners where it looked, a lot more nervous and everything. So, and the fact that, although Doohan, kind of lost again, it was just one of those, again, I chalk it up to being a rookie and everything, some, mistakes and things that he made, so he ended up, 14th on the day, and Pierre Gasly, he kind of, lost out a little bit, lost 2 places during the race and everything, but I really think that had more to do with, you know, Ferrari doing a better job. Lewis and, Lewis Hamilton, of course, being Lewis Hamilton, was actually, was able to have a very, although not spectacular,
Yeah.
a pretty damn good race when,
Yeah.
he qualified ninth and ended up finishing fifth, right behind his teammate. And he was only, what, 6 seconds off of
Yeah.
Leclerc at the end? So I think that, Lewis is starting to come to terms with the car as well. And so, I think just all in all, I just think that, but getting back to Alpine is I just really thought Alpine's pace was just really, really strong
Yeah.
this weekend. And I'm kind of going to be very interested to see how they go this weekend in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope it's consistent.
Yeah. So now one of the things we did not get to talk about in our post Suzuka rundown last week was Sainz's penalties. And so for those of you who weren't aware, Carlos Sainz was a couple of seconds late getting to the grid for the Japanese national anthem. So he was fined by the FIA because the drivers all have to be on the grid for the national anthem. And he basically, when he was asked about it later, it was an ill-timed visit to the loo. He, I guess, probably watching too much TikTok or something. He got a little, a little distracted and was, he literally was running to the grid when the national anthem started.
Yeah.
So he got fined for that. And then when he was asked about it later on, he said, well, shit happens during the press conference. And he got fined again by the FIA. So first of all, before we get into the FIA themselves, let's get your opinion, first of all, on the Sainz's penalties in the first place.
I'm mixed because he was 5 seconds late. But if you're running a tight ship and you have to have everything on time, you're not on time. The penalty. So
yes, and
yeah, it's minimal, but as far as the timing goes, but again, you can't run races 5-10 minutes late just because a driver's doing whatever. That's not fair. So everybody else was on time. Carlos knows that he needs to be there. He knows what the fines are. So
yep,
it is a rare day, but I agree with the FIA.
I'm glad to hear you say that because that's exactly my feeling is you've pretty much echoed my exact sentiment on the whole thing is that you're right. I don't care if it's 1 second or 10 seconds late. The fact that he was late, he knew that he had to be out there on time. And the fact, and the thing is that these drivers all have handlers, they have managers, they have physios who basically follow them to the bathroom. And the fact that his physio didn't get him out of the bathroom in time to get to the grid, it was a colossal failure, and mismanagement of time that I totally agree in this case with the FIA in fining him because that's the reason why the drivers are supposed to be there. They know that they're supposed to be there.
Exactly.
It's like their days are, their day, is literally down to the second timed out and everything. And it was just a massive failure on their part. And, so I agree that the penalty was deserved.
Yeah.
Now, the second penalty for saying shit happens in the press conference, I have a problem with.
Yeah, I did too.
Because he basically was making fun of the situation. He was making it a little lighthearted and everything. And the fact because he used the word shit, he got, fined again by the FIA. And I am, of the opinion, along with the drivers, that, there's been massive criticisms of the FIA and particularly of Ben Sulayem, who is the president of the FIA. And, the thing is that, it for all of its issues and everything that it had and its inconsistency, we never saw this kind of stupidity.
Don't get fined.
Yes, I'm trying not to get fined here but we never saw this silliness, when Max Mosley was running the show, or a lot of, Sulayem's predecessors and everything. And so there's been a lot of bad blood disharmony that has been generated towards Salem from the drivers. There's been
Yeah.
a number. I actually saw a clip that I don't know if it was from this last weekend or from a previous weekend where Piastri was heading to the podium, and Salem had reached out to take and try to, shake his hand. And Oscar basically, pushed his hand away and walked past him. And then there's
I didn't see
also
that.
and then there was also the very famous quote unquote snubbing that Lewis Hamilton gave him at a race earlier this year. So, I'm starting to wonder, is Ben's time at the FIA maybe coming to a close? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
Your
they're
thoughts?
always going to be a hated position. Massey was hated. He's going to be hated. So it's a tough position, no matter who you are.
That's true, and it's not just the FIA where that happens. I mean, you get
Yeah.
Goodman, or I'm sorry, not Goodman, Roger Goodall of the NFL, Gary Bettman of the NHL, just pretty much the commissioner of just, commissioner or president of just about every sporting league in the world is, booed and,
Yeah.
talked about, badly and everything, because they've got, the thankless job of they're basically policing,
Yep.
a lot of these things. And a lot of times they have to do things that, is very unpopular in the eyes of the fans.
Yeah. Exactly.
Before we jump into the Saudi Arabia preview for this weekend, I have one last question. So, Aston Martin, as we've talked about a number of times, Aston Martin has made a huge, what's the word? Not buy, but they have a enormous influx of talent that they have paid handsomely for during the off season. But so far, the Aston Martin has not looked very good. And my question to you is when do you think we're going to start seeing some benefit from that talent influx at Aston Martin?
Yeah,
Or do you think that they've given up on this year? They're just going to, do minor iterations and they're more focused on 2026?
Uh, I wouldn't think that they would give up this early in the season. Depending on their placement, say mid-season, maybe then, but it's just too early. I don't see them doing that yet. But as far as your question goes, when can we see their upgrades actually start producing something other than where they are currently, which is bottom of the grid almost? Maybe another 3 or 4 races. I'm hoping sometime very, very soon, but it's been tough for them, man. And I'm talking about Alonso especially.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, I really think that I think we're gonna, I don't think that they've given up on this season. First of all, that is not, if you listen to Lawrence Stroll the way he talks,
Yeah,
I just don't think that he would accept that.
right.
And I really think, but the thing is though, is that I think that, after they kind of went in the, they slid backwards last season, they kind of were starting from behind the 8 ball. And then plus they have all this influx of, new talent, new way of thinking. And it's just like any other, it's the whole battleship, uh, it's the whole battleship, what's the word I'm looking for here? Metaphor, in the fact that you can't turn a battleship
Yeah,
quickly. And
right.
an F1 team is exactly the same way, because every single one of the F1 teams from the top to the bottom have literally, thousands of employees. And it takes time to change cultures, and it takes time to change thinking, and it takes time to change the way that they do things. And even with, their beautiful new facilities, with all of the influx of talent,
Yeah.
it was going to take a little bit to
Yep.
make things start to, be a little more cohesive and everything. So my feeling is that I think we're going to kind of see them kind of mired in the back of the back of the pack for Saudi Arabia and probably for Miami. But I have a sneaking suspicion that by the time we get to Imola and the start of the European part of the
Hmm.
season, I
Hmm.
think that's when we're really going to see the changes to the Aston Martin and the upgrades are going to really start to dramatically improve the car then.
I hope so.
All right, so let's take and jump into Saudi Arabia real quick,
Yeah.
and for this coming weekend. So we go to our first street circuit of first true street circuit because Australia is kind of a street circuit, but it's
Yeah.
also parts of it are a permanent racetrack. So I don't consider Albert Park to be a true street circuit, whereas Saudi Arabia in Jeddah is the first true street circuit race of the season, and it's another race where they race underneath the lights. First of all, your thoughts on Saudi Arabia and its place on the calendar?
Oh, Saudi Arabia is another great track. So it's home of some very good duels, so
Mm-hmm.
it'll be a fun track for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same way. It's of the street circuits, it's not my favorite.
Hmm.
Because probably of the street circuits, probably Singapore is still my favorite. But Saudi Arabia is a close second. And having
Yeah.
driven it on the sim and everything, it's a very fast track. You spend a lot of time at full throttle. But when you do have to but some of the corners are very challenging, especially in sector one and everything. So I think it's going to be, and you're right. It always takes and delivers some really fascinating and usually some really good racing and everything. So I'm looking forward to it as well. So who do you think so give me your podium for this weekend.
It's gonna have to be McLaren. They just have a rocket ship this year, so
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's gonna have to be them. And I'll go ahead and say it's probably gonna be George Russell. It's gonna be hard to top those cars right now, those drivers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm with you though. I'm gonna say that probably two out of the three places on the barring any kind of unforeseen incident or something like that. What Saudi Arabia is known for some unpredictability, providing that there isn't anything disastrous or anything. Yes, I think it'll be another McLaren 1-2. Probably I'm hoping that Lando will regain form and stay so that way he can stay on top, but of the championship chart. But I'm telling you, Oscar is starting to gather some momentum, and if Lando doesn't do things right, he could find himself playing second fiddle to
It's
Oscar's championship drive this year.
There's no doubt
So,
about it. I
oh yeah,
mean, you give him two or three more races, and if he's as dominant as he was in Bahrain,
uh-huh,
I don't I don't doubt it because you have to back your number one, and Oscar
mm-hmm.
right now is acting like the number one.
He
Uh,
certainly is.
and Lando is acting like a number two. He needs to come up
Yeah.
quick.
He needs to regain the form that he
Yep.
had in Australia and China.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, okay. So third place on the podium though. I'm going to go out on a limb though, and because the Ferraris are already starting to look really, really good. We didn't really talk much about Ferrari this weekend, from this weekend, but but we did touch upon that. Leclerc qualified, third, finished fourth, only because Lando's brilliant pass in the closing stages of the race. But I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say Leclerc will be on the third step of the
Okay.
podium this weekend. Hmm?
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, but we'll see. So it'll definitely be fun and it'll definitely be interesting.
Yep. Yep.
All
Agreed.
right. So are you ready to bring it home?
I am. Yeah.
Okay. So that is all the time we have for this week. Join Corey and I next week when we will have our reactions from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix from Jeddah, an all new Stump the Pundit, and the return of our Tech Corner. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.